Welcome, everyone. So, I'm going to share today a bit about how ancestral healing and ancestral patterns can impact our diet, specifically our dietary struggles in the modern world. This is a missing factor that I feel should be more widely known that a lot of people don't really look at. So, I will share that when looking at something like food and dietary issues, that always looking from the most practical in this world to the most existential is the most helpful way to go about things. And so, what does that mean? It means that on a very super practical level, if somebody doesn't live near a grocery store or a place to get food or doesn't have money for food, that looking at ancestral trauma may not be the best thing for them. They may need to focus very much on this world and what is known as the hierarchy of needs, getting their basic needs met before looking at any deeper concerns. Likewise, I do very much suggest that when talking about food, that people look at it from an emotional angle and an energetic level, as well as looking at it from a family level. So, one of the things I love talking about is Chinese medicine. And in terms of diet, they talk about things like what foods that we crave, what foods that we should eat, in terms of season and in terms of a deeper understanding of taste, regarding food. For example, in Chinese medicine, there is a thought that if you are craving something sweet, for example, chocolates, that there may be an absence of sweetness in your life. And if we take knowledge like that, we can look towards foods, especially like overly sweet foods, and recognize why we may be so craving them. I will also say that as I explore other foods and cuisines, I am very much aware of how what we call bitterness and umami flavors, those really earthy flavors, are very absent from the modern Western diet. And so, one of the things I really love exploring nutritionally is all the colors, all the tastes of things, and exploring real food. Likewise, when going into herbal training, one of the baseline herbal thoughts can be that eating food that is, if at all possible, locally around you, as well as the herbs and that sort of stuff, and in season, brings the most health. So, not proselytizing here, just kind of offering thoughts of the different ways that we can kind of approach this topic, of which there are a huge amount. So, if we go a little bit deeper into the energetics of food, for example, you may notice that when your mind is really going in overload, or if you've had a really difficult day and you're feeling really frenetic or you're feeling really depleted, you may crave or eat different kinds of foods. For example, I tend to eat really heavy foods when I feel like I have either a bunch of energy coming up, or if I'm feeling kind of ungrounded or unsettled. And what food then does is provide a sense of an anchor for my system. So we can look at the energetics of food and how we feel after. This is one of the things that I gear people towards in my book, The Body Deva, and that happens naturally with people, is that when we start to get more in tune with our bodies, we start to recognize the cause and effect of things. They become kind of glaringly obvious road signs of, hey, I ate this food and it had this effect on me after, sort of thing. So the same thing could be said about emotions. A lot of us emotionally eat, and so there could be a thought of looking towards the emotions, and why we may need to cover them up or, kind of make them, kind of create sort of a density in our bodies in regards to that. So let me describe that in a slightly different way. For example, if somebody is feeling significant depression, they may eat food out of boredom, out of the depression, because what then the body does is focus its resources to digesting that food. It temporarily provides a reprieve from whatever feelings are emerging. And so if somebody is willing to look at the underlying emotions, then the working with those underlying emotions can be very helpful in no longer needing to kind of provide that sort of stopgap. So let's move forward and discuss family and ancestry. So, our childhood relationship with food very much shapes who we are in our relationship with food as an adult. And so, a lot of this has to do with our parents' relationship with food and how they have passed down that trauma or those teachings to us. For example, I will use a case study. Let's say our father grew up in a family of food insecurity. He was one of six. If he did not get to the dinner table in time, if he did not grab food, it would be eaten by everybody as fast and as much as possible. Basically, he wouldn't get a dinner if he wasn't fast enough and if he wasn't like greedy enough. So this can cause a couple of different reactions, but he may, for example, he may lean into that energy, and as an adult with children, he may be the person that his partner always complains to him that he always eats the whole bag of chips or the whole tub of ice cream the moment it comes into the home, or that he automatically loads his plate up first, with much more than he could possibly eat. He may even complain about what his children or his wife or partner are eating, because he has this giant unhealed need to sate himself as much as possible because he didn't get the chance to do so as a child. There can also be a completely opposite reaction in that he may have made a vow at some point that if he had a family, he would never do that to his children. So he may be actually withholding his energy, pretending he isn't hungry, never eating the last of something, always making sure that his children, relatives, friends, wife, partner are always getting food before he does. He may even be in a process of denying food or going periods without eating, going heavily into kind of dietary trends that are about withholding food from himself, in order to sort of live out this pattern and this vow he made to not kind of carry on that generational trauma. So that is just one example, but there are so many others out there about how our parents' behavior and their attitudes towards food, how they impact us, how they guide us for better or worse. So when I gave that example about the father, we can start to see how that didn't just start with him. It started with his family, and it likely started before that, going generations backwards. And so if we look towards ancestral healing, what comes up for a lot of people are experiences where they did not get enough food, where crops failed. We used to be much more farmer centered, and for a lot of us, we can just go to the local market, to the grocery store, and get food. In the not so distant past, of course, what happened was that if a season of crops failed, if the weather didn't hold, if there was disease ravaging the community, then people would starve, they wouldn't eat. And similarly, there can be the spread of diseases that cause food issues, issues with farming, and also wars. Wars are typically a big one for people undergoing ancestral healing with food because there can be things like rations that made an impact. There can be the fear or terror associated with not having enough food or going through experiences in wartime, in struggle, or with crops failing, stuff like that, that get passed down because they are a lot of energy, they are a lot of intense energy, and they require a sense of ancestral as well as sometimes cultural healing to be able to sort of lift out of our systems, so to speak. I will say in some lesser known cases, some people may have had ancestries that go back to people who were, gluttons, so to speak. So members of royalty or people who sort of fed off of other people were in a position to do so. And those have an impact as well. If you were part of a royalty or ruling class, and you're, taking the food out of the hands of starving peasants because of sharecropping or whatever was going on, that very much has an impact on your relationship with food. So this is very much just an introduction to this subject, but it can detail exactly why ancestral healing for food difficulties, for food cravings, for food issues can be enormously helpful. So I am going to share a caveat, which is that if your eating would be considered disordered, to the point where there is necessary treatment for it, I always recommend that people do that first, keeping with a this world sort of sentiment. Once you get yourself into a safe place, emotionally and physically, then deeper healing can be done on the subject. Basically, if you are drowning in your own life, you don't need to, bring up ancestral issues about poverty and war and lack and crops failing and, all of that sort of stuff going on. The other thing that I will share is that sometimes people do wish to look towards ancestral healing first, and it may be exactly the right decision for them to look at those things first. At its best, what spiritual healing of this sort of deep level can do is clear out sort of an anchor or really heavy energies, and then the more surface level energies can be tended to. So basically, even if you go for the deep stuff first, then looking at your own reasons for emotionally eating, the cause and effect of energetics of eating, how your mother or your father related to food and its impact on you, any sort of trauma or healing that needs to be done from your childhood or from school or from your adulthood regarding your dietary sort of health. Learning about things on a very practical level. It sounds so simple, but a lot of us have not received basic nutritional advice, basic advice how to cook, how to prepare food for ourselves, that sort of thing. And so if that sort of thing is lacking, it's understandable. It happens to a lot of people, but we can learn how to basically cook. We can learn how to basically take care of ourselves as well as address any unhealed emotional needs that may be blocking us from taking care of ourselves through food. So I hope that you found this helpful and that maybe it will give you some insight about your own snacking, eating, dietary stuff going on, because it is such a multifaceted and complex issue for so many of us, and quite frankly, so many of us, due to how our ancestors lived and died, could stand to look at this topic and for it to be a bit more mainstream.